Hello, I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and you are watching Tom Talks Rubbish. It's the place for interviews, wrestling reviews, and so much more.
Make sure you subscribe to Tom Talks Rubbish. I highly recommend you subscribe here first.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talks Rubbish, and today I'm back with another video. This time, I'm joined by my boy, Connor, from the Wrestling with Fiction podcast. So, thank you for joining me, Connor.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Should we pull the curtain back and explain what a nightmare it's been to record this?
Yeah, it's been a trip.
I don't know whether it was my internet, his internet, or a mixture of the two.
We'll just say it was the internet gods. It was the internet gods.
But I don't think the internet gods want this collaboration to happen.
They don't. It's too powerful.
Evidently, yeah. So, we'll get into Wrestling with Fiction with podcast in a sec. But should we discuss how this collaboration came about first?
Yeah, I mean, where do you want to go with it? Do you want to go with how we met, or just how we just...
This is your interview, boy. So...
Yeah, we first really started talking, from the Simon Miller podcast, when I, gave in a question. And then you ended up giving a comment, hey, I never heard of your stuff before.
But I checked it out, and I really like it.
Yep.
And... I don't know, was that the same with my stuff?
Yeah, I'd say it was. Yeah, because I remember, I think you noticed my stuff, then you got in contact with me and was like, hey, is there any piece of advice that you want for an interview or something like that?
I sent you an interview, I think.
Yeah, you did. And I ended up giving you feedback, which I have no idea if it was helpful or not.
Oh, it really was, because I just take any bit of feedback I can get. I know I'm a novice at this. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So, and then about a week ago, I think I contacted you just being do you want to come on? It'd be fun to talk about your podcast.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it happened. It was just very simple. I think I only just recently moved in, so I was just checking your messages. I was like, oh, yeah, I can do this.
Yeah. So that is a nice segue, actually, to what is the Wrestling with Fiction podcast, for those that may not know.
So for people who don't know what the Wrestling with Fiction podcast is, it's basically a fantasy booking podcast. It basically tries to cover everything in wrestling, from booking into the future, rebooking angles, and sometimes asking the question, could your favorite fictional character work in the wrestling business?
Would you work on a current angle?
Yeah, absolutely. I've done a bunch of stuff that's been ongoing at the point. I did a very early episode on Orange Cassidy and his whole thing with Chris Jericho and how
I think I saw that.
Yeah.
Because we discussed this off camera, but I'll just fill people in. I've seen your stuff, but because I don't have access to podcasts, I've only seen your, what you would call retro stuff, wouldn't you?
Yeah, definitely my older stuff.
Because I have access to YouTube. So for those that don't know, what is the idea behind the Wrestling with Fiction podcast there? I know you've explained what it is.
I guess the idea is just to kind of show that anything in wrestling can get over, because I think the idea that every single angle is bad is kind of not really the right way of looking at it. We're in a wrestling world where a potted plant named Mitch got over.
And just to tell you guys from the previous interview, we discussed this, but Chris Jericho got the word "it" over at the end of the day.
True.
Yeah. So, obviously, it's ideas out of your own head, right?
Right.
So, what happens when you first come out with a kernel of an idea?
So, when I first come up with an idea, it's very much looking at as something we talked about in the previous interview, I like to always go from where I want the endpoint to be and then work my way backwards. So I have like a couple ideas to help me get there, but it isn't really fully realized until like I've just like wrote it down from like beginning to end.
How long would it take you to write something down?
It really depends. Like if it's something in the complete like fictional space, like trying to adapt a video game character into the world of wrestling, that stuff can take a lot longer. But if it's something more modern, say something like MJF, for example,
Yeah.
I reckon from like the weekly basis of the podcast, it'll probably take me about 3 days to get an idea.
Okay. So when you've come up with the idea, it's been written down on paper or a computer.
Right.
Do you have to do research to flush that idea out and make sure it's accurate almost?
Oh, yeah, all the time. It's no secret that like a lot of research tries to go into like each episode, or at least as much research as I can do.
Mm-hmm.
Just purely just looking into like the wrestling character, the way they speak in their promos, to just little things like connections they've had in like previous storylines to other wrestlers, because sometimes finding that one tiny piece of information can like make or break an angle.
Okay. So when researching, what do you use to research? Is it like watching wrestling? Is it Google? What is it basically?
Honestly, probably a combination of the two. I like doing a mixture of just sort of like watching their wrestling matches, kind of seeing how the structure of their matches go and how they like respond to like backstage segments, and also just like looking up whether it be like real life interviews, say a Talk is Jericho one, or if you want to throw back to Edge and Christian's old interview show, which I loved, by the way.
Yeah, I was so sad when that. But congrats to them both on being able to come back and finish that.
100%. It's amazing that they're wrestling today.
How did we get on that tangent?
Yeah.
Anyway, so when researching, you'll listen to podcasts, you'll watch stuff on the network, but I am curious what the mix is between accuracy and your own ideas. What's more important to you?
I feel like it's really a coin toss, but I think if I had to pick between the two, I think it's like with anything that you do with any creative work, if you don't enjoy the creative work that you're doing, then how do you expect other people to enjoy it?
Yeah, I agree with that.
So for me, it's more important to kind of have fun with what you're making than just to like constantly try and force something out.
No, I would agree with that. So, with talking about pouring stuff out, what are you like with consistency? Is it important to you that you get an episode out every week? Or would you be happy if like an episode was going to take a bit longer to produce, that you missed a week, for example?
So we talked about this before, but for me, I always try and keep it weekly as much as I can. I value consistency just because that's been a very big thing in my life. That's always kind of like helped me get through a lot of things.
No, I understand.
Just sort of like, even if it's just doing like a little bit every day and going straight into it, that's always kind of been my thought process. So like when I do miss a week, which that's only really happened just because of things.
I want you to tell the story you told me in the previous one before. It cracked out.
Oh, right. The one about just specifically
why you may miss a week.
The reasons why I really missed a week was mostly because one of them was just because I was having university stuff that was like a final week of a deadline. It was during my final year. Then the other one was just because of a file corruption.
So you wouldn't, but would you feel comfortable saying to yourself, look, I'm going to take the week off this week?
Yeah.
And not upload it?
I'd say I would be if
But
I was,
I can hear the but.
but I've also debated a lot about going bi-weekly so I can like focus on improving my writing as a whole.
Mhm.
Just as
So,
like,
sorry, man. No,
Oh.
continue. I'll let you monologue.
uh, I'm sorry, I like to monologue.
It's fine.
Uh, it's just because I think I want to try and make the quality of my work as good as I possibly can, and
Yeah.
in turn, that could just be a lot better stuff going out there. Because I think in terms of wrestling, the more variety of content you have, the better.
No,
Like,
I
one-
agree with that.
One thing that I'd really love to see, this is just me coming as like a fan of wrestling or a fan of wrestling content, is just more variety in wrestling content.
Yeah,
Because I think
maybe.
sorry.
I definitely agree with that. But continue, please.
Like for me, I feel like there's so much room to try and bring more people into the idea of wrestling content because I don't think there's a definitive entryway, especially in modern wrestling, to get into it. Because you either
Yeah.
know from a friend of a friend, or you kind of got into it when you were younger. So, like, even if you can make like a simple connection through something like I do, like video games, that could be
Is that-
somebody's entryway.
Is that like I was just going to ask you? Well, how did you get into wrestling then, and when did you get into wrestling?
See, it's weird because I don't remember how I got into wrestling at all.
Okay.
I think if I were to go back, me and my brother were probably sweeping through channels, and we caught a clip of Monday Night Raw, and we somehow got multiple VHS tapes. We're talking like SummerSlam 2002, No Way Out 2004, some of my favorite pay-per-views, and whenever I would go to sleep, because I always had trouble going to sleep when I was younger, I would always put on No Way Out or SummerSlam 2002 and watch them like again and again and again.
I
So,
can
like,
imagine the VS tape.
Yeah.
VHS tape. Literally, by the end, it was like you could only see a
Yeah.
bit loud.
like it would be at the end, and of course, me and my brother had these like bunk beds at the time, so it'd be right at the end of like the top bunk with a VHS tape. Just watching No Way Out with like some Domino's pizza. It's a really nostalgic time.
Fair enough. So obviously, you create wrestling content, so you have to keep up with the product, right?
Right.
When coming up with an idea, are your ideas based on what's going on in the current product, or is it more fantasy?
It's really a mixture. And I know I've said mixture a lot, but I think especially when you're looking at the current product, it's a mixture because wrestling evolves on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
So like you can predict where an angle is going and like present ideas, but it's very easy for it to go completely out of proportion into the world of fantasy because of the way that angles change from a week to week basis.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
No, I can still hear you.
yeah. I was just wondering if you wanted me to elaborate or not.
No, elaborate, please.
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to think of questions in my head, but I'm also listening.
So, yeah, talking further onto that, for me, who's tried to like book a lot of current stuff in the world of wrestling, I've had it where ideas that I've had in my head zig when WWE zagged.
Mhm.
So it's one of those things where it's like you can plan out this perfect idea in your head and you can go straight into it and think, oh, this is really good.
Yeah.
And then it just automatically changes like, oh, I guess my video is kind of dated now.
Have you ever had an idea that you've done, and then like 2 months later, it turned out WWE have done something similar to your idea, or any wrestling company even, or have you seen a variation on your idea and gone, no, they did it better than I did?
I mean, I think with that question, I think of course that's happened. I don't know if I can really remember a specific moment, but I think in the world of like writing and wrestling in particular, everything's been done before.
Yeah.
So like it's always going to be like a variation of another thing, of another thing. And it just kind of being this repeated cycle, because in wrestling and in writing in general, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You just need to make an idea that people connect with.
Yeah. So, do you have any desire to write for someone like WWE or AEW?
I mean, that's a yes and no answer, if I'm honest. Because I think,
Elaborate, please.
okay, so the reason why I would say yes is because, like, come on, I'm a guy who fantasy books wrestling. That's a dream. Like, as a person who's done screenwriting and playwriting and radio playwriting, I would love to write a wrestling show. That's amazing. But at the same time, like, say take WWE, like Monday Night Raw and SmackDown, the stress and the pressure those people have to go through, I can't imagine having to
We
do
talked
that.
about this earlier during the previous one, didn't we?
Right.
And I want you to go into detail again about giving the writers some slack, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So for me, I have so much sympathy for the writers of WWE in particular, because they have probably the hardest job of them all in terms of wrestling or creating storylines, and we do not give them enough credit. So for me, I
Yeah.
look at the characters and
Oh,
stuff,
no.
the internet. Oh wait,
Huh?
no, we're good. We're good. So
No, we're still there.
yeah. So the characters and writing in wrestling, it's particularly really hard to do, because take your favorite movie or a masterpiece. You gave an example in the last part about Batman or The Dark Knight.
I want to change my answer, though.
Okay.
Marvel.
Okay, take the Marvel Cinematic Universe. A first draft of a screenplay, and keep in mind, this is only the first draft. Some of this stuff can take up to 6 months, and that's not including redrafts and further redrafts and further rewrites, and we're not factoring in casting and all this other stuff. WWE writers, they are given a set of pieces that they have to work with. And sometimes, depending on a crowd, depending on, you know, the performer in question, those angles that they firmly wrote down and planned in their heads won't always go according to plan.
Because a wrestler could get injured, a wrestler could leave.
Right, exactly. And it's also
Or
just
Vince
like,
could just come in one day and tear it up.
yeah, and like even take, for example, like the what chant or just like basic improvisation. Modern day wrestling is one of those things where, especially in WWE, the idea of improvisation is an incredibly difficult thing. Look at how they responded to WrestleMania. Their perfect inlaid plans were delayed by what, like 20 to 30 minutes because of rain?
I actually didn't see that. Like, because I did not watch WrestleMania live, because in the UK, obviously, as you know, it comes on at like 1 a.m.
Exactly.
So I didn't see it till the next day. And by the time I went to watch WrestleMania, guess what happened? Take a guess.
Oh, the feed cut out?
No, they edited it off the network, the whole
Oh,
rain thing. So I missed out on Michael Cole in a poncho.
and Samoa Joe.
Sorry,
The
Samoa
sight.
Joe in a poncho.
What a sight.
But yeah, I understand completely what you're saying. So, as someone that has a love for writing and stuff, what is your writing style? I know we've talked about it a little bit, but
I guess
did we talk about it in this one? I get really confused.
I don't think we talked about it. So I consider myself not a great writer at all. I'm
Mhm.
definitely not a good writer. People who say that they think I'm good, you're not. You're wrong. I am not a
Fair
good
enough.
writer. So the reason why I think I'm not a great writer is because I'm not very well read or well written. So I'm used to writing stuff like screenplays and playwriting, where it's very like conversational based
Yeah.
and just kind of like back and forth dialogue here and there. And the only real benefit I have with wrestling is just I've watched a lot of it.
Fair enough, yeah.
So I guess the process that I have is one of a fan, pretty much.
What comes first when writing an idea down? Is it the research or the writing the idea?
100% writing the idea. It's always been that way for me. I've always been a much better ideas person than a person getting research. For me, I've always found that the hardest part for me is finding research that backs up my idea.
Yeah. So have you ever had an idea in your head and then done research and gone, wait, no, that idea wouldn't work?
Ah, there's been a couple ideas, especially when you rebook things. There's a bunch of stuff. So I'm gonna give a quick shout out to the Sweet Chin Mic podcast because I recently had to rebook the Anonymous Raw General Manager, which is a whole other thing.
Ugh, why did you do that to yourself?
I don't know, but I did it. And one of the hardest parts of that was deciding who would be a good fit for the Anonymous Raw General Manager. And part of that was
How did you make it, out of personal curiosity?
I made it Triple H.
Okay,
Because,
I can see where you're going with that.
Because you could play into the real life stuff that he talked about on Talk is Jericho, which was that he was gradually being pulled into the McMahon meetings and being pulled into these other things. He was making appearances, but he wasn't consistently having these big main event matches. There was a huge period where he was off television for like 7
Probably
months.
from about 2011 to probably even end of 2010 till probably the 2013 consistently.
Yeah, exactly. So there was a huge gap in there where you could slide in Triple H. And for me, part of that research came into looking into Adam Blompier's booking video and trying to like take in some of the stuff that I heard from his thing and factor that in as well.
Yeah. Obviously, we've got to talk about Blompier a little bit. Is he an inspiration to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to be, right? Like, especially
with the amount of good booking videos he's come out with. What Culture, Wrestle Talk Now, Parts Unknown. How can he not be?
Yeah, it's very hard for me not to look at Adam Lompier as kind of like an inspiration. We talked about it before. My two biggest inspirations was Adam Lompier's booking videos and a podcast called The ADCs of Wrestling. And yeah, because I like to do like a lot of like skits and just kind of being odd. And for me, that was kind of the stuff that ADCs of Wrestling were doing, a lot of like parody music videos and parody song covers, stuff in the middle and throughout the show. And I thought that's something that I could kind of implement to some extent.
Yeah. So how long would you say coming up with an idea, researching, and then recording and editing overall takes?
It depends on what I'm doing. If it's like a video game character or an anime character or it's some fictional character, it could take about a week for that. But if it's like a wrestler who I'm already pretty familiar with and I have a good knowledge of their history, I could probably go for like 3 or 4 days.
Fair enough.
I think that's like a fair estimate for me.
I'm trying to think of a way to phrase your question so it doesn't sound like one we've asked before. But I'll ask you the question I did ask you before, but it hasn't been asked on this recording. Most surprising fact you found out when researching for a video or a podcast, and then least surprising fact.
Most surprising, definitely how big of a fan Cody Rhodes is of The Legend of Zelda. I think that was a blessing in disguise for me when I was trying to figure out how do you book him in All Elite Wrestling and have it make sense. And I guess least surprising, I guess, least surprising. I mean, I guess it was like Fuego turning up on Dynamite out of nowhere and being black masked. I was in the middle of like planning a recording for him. I'm thinking there has to be a way to put him on Dynamite. There has to be a way to book him in there. And then I turn on Fight for the Fallen.
And he's in there. So obviously you brought up AEW as being a fan of that a few times during this recording. But what wrestling do you watch on a current basis to keep up with the product?
So for me, I try and keep up with like clips on YouTube specifically for Raw, which is I think has been a common trend for a lot of people recently.
I told you this off camera. I've done about 3-4 interviews this week that have been related to wrestling. And I think that's just a common theme at the minute.
Yeah, it's a shame, to be honest.
But other than that, what wrestling do you watch?
I keep up with NXT just purely because I really do enjoy the product. I think there's a lot of really good characters in there that are very fun to sort of like play around with. And of course, like it's hard for me not to like AEW. For me personally, I'm going to come off as an AEW shill right now.
I think I am. The amount of recordings I've been on this week and the amount of recordings that I've done with other people, I think I am. But I don't care.
It is not a perfect product. I will preface this. It's not a perfect product.
Not.
But it's...
Women need more time.
Yeah. Women need more time. Sometimes there are certain segments that you don't necessarily need on the show, but are kind of added in.
It's going to sound dumb, but sometimes they overpack.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Like, for example, this week, they could have given more time to the Nick Gage Jericho match. This week at time of recording, I would say.
Yeah. But even then...
And got rid of, in my opinion, not got rid of, but moved to another show maybe. Jurassic Express and Christian versus who was it? The Hardy Office, basically.
Yeah, Hardy Family Office.
Like, it felt like one of them matches where it was like, you only have 2 minutes and they were on double speed all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, why I like AEW is that when it hits out of the park, it hits out of the park.
Yeah.
Like, Hangman Page's stuff is easily probably my favorite storyline going on television right now.
I'd say, what do you mean in television overall?
I mean, I wouldn't say... I think part of it, just because I feel really emotionally invested in Hangman's story. I think they've done a really good job of making us like sympathize with his character from beginning to end.
In my opinion, they've done such a good job of, he's not going to get it this time, to when would he pick it up now, sort of thing.
He's a guy.
But anyway, we're not on a tangent now. We're here to talk about you today. So when coming up with an idea, do you have to do research that the idea hasn't been done before?
I mean, not really, to be honest. Like, even if the idea has been done before, at the end of the day, it's the same as like a different author for the same series or a different writer on a same show. You can always bring your own spin to anything that you're writing to make it kind of your own. So like, take for example, wrestling. Everybody's seen a heel turn. Everybody's seen a face turn. But not every single one is the same. They all have their own interpretations. Like, they can be similar, absolutely, but the context, the reason why it happened, the overall reaction and emotional weight of it, it can all be completely different.
Yeah. So, I'm trying to think of some other questions. Oh, yeah. Have you had an idea that you've scrapped? I mean, we talked about this in the last recording, but I love your answer so much that it's like, I want you to say it again.
Oh, God. I've had ideas that I've scrapped, but there have been stuff that I've kept up intentionally just as like a learning point. Because I always kind of believe that, you know, everything is kind of like a learning experience. Like, sometimes you can have those like pieces of content that they're not really perfect the way that you want them to be. But the only way that you can really like get better and improve is sometimes is just through uploading it. There are some ideas that really connect with you, and there are some that don't really. And I'll be easily admit this as a person who does weekly content, that it's sometimes really difficult to get the same magic for each episode.
Weekly content is hard, bro.
Yeah. Amen to those people who do daily content. I don't know how you do it.
No, like I went through a stage when I first started my YouTube channel that quantity over quality. So I was uploading every day. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And it was like, by the end of it, it was like, nah, that video can go down. That, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in the end, I've just said once a week, as long as I get a video out on a Monday, I'm happy.
Yeah.
Is that the same for you? Like, would you ever expand to more than once a week?
I mean, I've thought about it, absolutely. Like, I thought about going beyond just sort of like fantasy booking content and trying other stuff. In fact, that's
Like
something...
reviews or something?
Not reviews, because I feel like the review market is really oversaturated in the world of wrestling.
Yeah,
I've had ideas for content for a while, and one of them is to kind of create a gateway for people who aren't wrestling fans to get into it.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just pitch this to you now as we're in the middle of this interview. Why is it that we don't have a wrestling show or analysis video for wrestling that takes the emotional weight of pop culture things? Say, I'm just going to throw this out there because I compared Hangman Page's stuff to Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yeah.
You know the like bit with like Sozin's comment, and it's like, you think Aang's going to be the big hero and save everything at that point in the season?
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing as Hangman Page, because I think the majority of people expected on that show Hangman Page was going to win and beat Kenny Omega.
Yeah.
And then he was going to have to go face him at All Out, maybe win the world title. And then it didn't happen. And now we're in a process where he is rebuilding in the same way that Aang in Avatar: The Last Airbender kind of has that rebuild period where he's kind of in limbo for a bit. And I feel like that's something that's really missing in the world of wrestling, is that gateway to get fans, or at least new people, into wrestling by relating it to stuff that's not really existent in modern day pro wrestling. Because pro wrestling is, I compare it to comic books. You know of the property. You know of big people like The Rock, John Cena, Stone Cold Steve Austin. But there's no real starting point to get into wrestling.
I think the problem with wrestling is it tries to be too many things. 1 minute it wants to be a sport, the next minute it wants to be a movie. So, for example, I've tried to get friends into it and trying to explain to, like, even if wrestling took 2 weeks off at Christmas and restarted again for the Rumble, it'd be like, at least you could explain to them why stories are starting again.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any sense.
Oh, no, that makes complete sense. I've had a bunch of friends who I've tried to get into wrestling, and you have to explain so much just to kind of get them to understand certain points. Like, there's no real jumping in point.
No, there isn't. Like, that's one thing that I feel like, and we're going to come off like AEW shields here, but that's one thing that AEW does really well is Excalibur specifically will explain things very detailed.
Yeah.
So going back to the Wrestling with Fiction podcast, because we'll probably wrap this up in a little while, because we've been talking for about half an hour.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Yeah, that's completely fine.
You've said, like, you've had ideas that you've scrapped, but what is one upload that you would go, if I could redo this way, I'd redo it another way?
There's a bunch, actually. There's a lot of earlier stuff that I would want to redo, and I thought about it for a while, actually. Like, I've thought about going back to those certain characters, because I've done so much about booking in the present that I could
Yeah.
always, like, go back to it. I really want to redo people like Hangman Page, definitely. I feel like that would be a lot of fun to do right now.
Mm.
I really want to redo... What would be another one? That'd be really good. Bray Wyatt, definitely.
Mm.
Bray Wyatt's a
Especially
great one.
with what happened at time of recording last week.
Yep, that would be a fantastic one. I'd also really kind of want to redo... Oh, what would be another one that I would absolutely love? Probably Chris Jericho. Definitely Chris Jericho.
Again, all current stuff.
Mm.
So I saw a tweet the other day where
Okay.
you said, I'm going to manifest it into the universe. I want to make money with my podcast by the end of next year.
Yeah.
Is that like, because this is how I always end my interviews. Where do you see the podcast in like 5 years? Or do you see yourself still doing it in 5 years?
Honestly, I have no idea. I have no idea where I see this. Hi, me from the future here to tell you that we had some more technical difficulties. Now, back to the interview.
So where were we, like, before the recording went all funny? Because you're going to edit that bit out, yeah?
Yeah. So
I think I asked you where do you see the podcast in the next 5 years?
yeah, so for me that's a funny question because I didn't even think it was going to last a year. So
Okay.
I don't know if I really have an immediate future for it, to be honest. I've just kept doing it weekly to a point where I've been blessed to meet so many like good people in the wrestling community. I quickly want to shout out people like Making Kayfabe, Sweet Chinwag Podcast, people like that. I can see myself doing it for the next 5 years, possibly, and hopefully maybe expanding upon it further into more than just fantasy booking content. But I really want to, I guess for me, challenge what like the genre of pro wrestling and content creation. Because as we already kind of discussed before, I think there's more to expressing like the idea of pro wrestling than just talking about it in reviews. And we've started to see that stuff with like analysis videos going into pro wrestling and like going into storylines. And I think there's still room to expand kind of like the way that we express pro wrestling in like an internet content.
Is that something you want to be a part of then?
Yeah, I think that's kind of something I can see myself doing. Or at least to some extent, I hope.
Okay. So maybe if not the podcast, but do you see yourself still being involved in wrestling in the next 5 years? Maybe not specifically fantasy booking.
I mean, I hope so. I feel like that'd be something. Like I've grown up with wrestling what feels like my entire life. So
Yeah.
I can't see myself.
No, continue. Because I just came up with a question and I'll ask you in a minute.
I can't see myself not being involved with wrestling to some extent.
Okay. I feel like that's a really nice way to end it. So if you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Where can the people find you, Connor?
You can find me at Connor the Cooper on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram at Wrestling with Fiction, and you can find the Wrestling with Fiction podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
So what we will do is I will get Connor to leave a link in the description of send me all the links for his podcast, and I'll leave them in the description.
Oh.
Oh, also, shout out to Connor, by the way, because he's editing this as well. As we've discussed, I don't like editing, so getting someone else to do it is always great. Anyway, guys, I will see you in the next one. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.